Hello, and welcome to Audience Thoughts. My name is Finn. I like watching movies, reviewing movies, and also reading reviews about movies. And that's what this podcast is about. Each episode, I review a film I've seen recently, and then I read a range of reviews from other moviegoers. I'm an avid user of Letterboxd, a movie catalog and community website, which I joined about 5 years ago, and I've been continually impressed by the quality of user reviews, and in particular how people with such varying opinions can so eloquently and effectively argue their stance on a movie. This podcast is about sharing a range of audience thoughts on film. For the first episode of Audience Thoughts, I'll be discussing Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Wakanda Forever was directed by Ryan Coogler and released in theaters in November of 2022. I'll start with my own review, and then I'll read excerpts from a number of others that represent the range of opinions of the movie. On Letterboxd, my username is Griffin, that's Gryffin, and my four favorite films currently listed on there are The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, the anime from 2006, Buffalo 66, Female Prisoner 701 Scorpion, and Take, the Japanese film from 2015 by Sion Sono. I scored Wakanda Forever an 8 out of 10, and my review reads as follows. Wakanda Forever is a special film. It's barely a Marvel movie at all, in that it's not formulaic, mathematically paced, and bombastic. The main difference between Wakanda Forever and most of the preceding MCU entries is that this one has scenes. The film breathes, though arrhythmically, establishing a dramatic tone. Characters dialogue for minutes at a time about their dreams, they monologue about their fears, they contemplate, share, and change, and the villain is an actual character with presence, drive, and depth. Indeed, the ensemble cast is excellent throughout, and the actors give texture to every role. For the first audience review, let's read from Andre Schwartz. On their Letterboxd profile, they listed the following movies as their favorites: Bo Burnham's Inside, Spirited Away, Into the Spider-Verse, and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Andre gave Wakanda Forever a perfect 10 out of 10. Andre writes, if I were to talk about everything this movie does well, I'd be here forever. This film is the entire grieving process condensed, and the raw emotion of each of these characters is felt. Furthermore, the conflict between Talokan and Wakanda is a powerful story on the effects of colonialism and how imperialists have caused marginalized groups to fight each other. Namor was a great antagonist. Shuri's character arc throughout the film was also profound. From Shuri questioning her faith to her anger at the world manifesting in the form of Killmonger in the ancestral plane, Shuri has an emotional and deep character arc. Angela Bassett's performance as Queen Ramonda is Oscar-worthy. She is fantastic, and it makes so much sense why her monologues were used in the trailers. I can go on forever, but I do want to commend the movie for one more thing. This movie was able to take such unfortunate circumstances and still make a film that can simultaneously stand on its own, while also reminding us of what we lost and giving us that time to grieve. The film was a touching tribute to the legacy of a king. Rest in power, Chadwick Boseman. Next, we'll read from Tim Sipal, username Ninetales. Their favorite movies are Inglourious Bastards, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Seven Samurai, and In the Mood for Love. Tim scored Wakanda Forever a 6 out of 10. Wakanda Forever is convoluted and confusing. Seeing all the praise Ryan Coogler has gotten for this movie, I wholeheartedly disagree. His direction is all over the place. The tonal inconsistency from scene to scene is annoying and amateurish. Wakanda Forever mostly doesn't feel like a Marvel movie, which nowadays isn't a bad thing per se, but it doesn't really feel like anything. The editing in this movie is absolutely atrocious. Shots are unrelated, cut off at random points, slow motion camera blur and similar effects are used, so out of place one might think they just rolled dice to decide on the editing style. Despite all of its technical faults, Wakanda Forever still has its strengths. It without a doubt has the best story and writing in the MCU in years, and if it weren't for the aforementioned horrendous editing, this great story would be much more elevated. Still, the imagery and parallels are so incredibly obvious that I would hardly call it imagery, and the dialogue sometimes falls flat, which is why the writing, if viewed closely, is far from top tier. The one aspect of this movie I 100% adore, though, is the way Namor and Talokan are handled. From introduction to development to ending, I find it flawless. Huerta's performance elevates the stunning costume and set design, and his dialogue is probably the best in the script. The homages to Chadwick Boseman are also a nice and emotional touch. All in all, this probably is the most effort Marvel has put into a movie in a long time. It's a step in the direction, but nothing breathtaking as a whole. And for our first negative review, comes from Jed Pressgrove. Jed does not have favorite movies listed in their profile, but the recent activity does include a 3 out of 10 review for Toy Story 2. Regardless, I really appreciate the writing on Wakanda Forever, which they gave a 1 out of 10. It reads, "Is the movie almost done?" said the little girl to her father, a stranger who sat next to me at an afternoon showing of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. The girl's impatience spoke to me. As the film makes audience wait about 2 hours before Shuri, Letitia Wright, the sister of T'Challa, played by late and great Chadwick Boseman, finally transforms into the next version of the titular superhero. And I thought Eternals was wasted with exposition. Wakanda Forever reflects its title in the worst way imaginable. Severe lack of editing isn't the only critical flaw of Wakanda Forever. The film often features poor lighting, which, as with Denis Villeneuve's overrated Dune, becomes particularly tiring during scenes of interminable dialogue between characters with very little personality. The action is trash, the choreography is unimaginative and unconvincing, and the jerky and unconfident camera work seems like an amateurish method of distracting from the weightlessness of awkwardly animated CGI figures. Wright delivers a dreadful lead performance that alternates between flatness and laughable crybaby overacting. And Namor, one of the most intimidating and distinguished characters in Marvel comic book history, is reduced to a resounding thud of a villain thanks to the head-scratching casting of Tenoch Huerta Mejia, who has zero screen presence and looks like a somewhat out-of-shape nobody off the street. It's also obvious that, contrary to the suggestions of optimistic consumerist responses, nothing has fundamentally changed with the commercial success of the original Black Panther. Marvel Studios and Disney have little regard for the intelligence and dignity of black people despite the surface-level respect they extend with this meandering sequel. An early scene where the Queen of Wakanda attends a United Nations meeting confirms the film producer's deceptiveness. Why the hell would Wakanda, which is supposed to be this untouchable and highly advanced society, even bother answering to white world leaders about its vibranium supply? The scene is nothing more than an attempt to patronize black audiences with the Queen's contrived wink and allusion to the inherent dangerousness of white-led nations. And does anyone actually give a crap about Everett K. Ross, Martin Freeman's monumentally dull white CIA agent? There's no point to his character other than when he remarks about the goodness of Wakanda to his crass, Karen-esque ex-wife, Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Marvel and Disney offer Ross as the obligatory woke white prince who, with his connection to the otherwise dubious CIA, represents this bumbling hope that maybe black people do have a buddy they can count on in the American system. Such elements go well beyond fantasy into the realm of condescending racial politics. Thus, the Wakanda Forever subtitle appears to refer to Marvel and Disney's belief that they have a new dependable market they can make money off of for eternity, even with second-rate acting, writing, and special effects. In this sense, the memory of Chadwick Boseman is just one more thing that can be exploited for a buck. Our next review is from Blake VIP, username Popcorn Movie. Their favorite films are Doctor Strangelove, Woman in the Dunes, Harakiri, and Cries and Whispers. Blake gave Wakanda Forever a 6 out of 10. Chadwick Boseman was a great actor and he has missed the world over. Ryan Coogler goes to great lengths to instill his spirit into the film and makes his real-life death a sense of strength for these characters. The movie spends upwards of 15 to 20 minutes of tributes to a man gone too soon. It's the highlight of the film and an outstanding way to pay tribute to an actor posthumously and tell a story at the same time. Unfortunately, the story then devolves into Marvel's formula and drivel. There are certainly strong moments and features a Marvel villain with actual depth, but at nearly 3 hours long, the film lost me with its elongated action sequences and boring set pieces. The final act is especially egregious and overlong. There are no new story elements presented, only rehashed themes from earlier in the film that add virtually nothing to the overall arc outside of Return of Black Panther. I do love the attention on women in Wakanda and the focus of indigenous populations, with a heavy emphasis on colonizer thematics. The writing thematically works great, but the plot has a hard time conveying these ideas outside of exposition. Furthermore, the Marvel humor is still spread on a tad too thick. It constantly comes in to undermine situations and make these films feel less important, when what they're fighting for is their way of life. Another aspect that's worth criticizing are the stakes. Coogler does a better job than the majority of MCU, but there's a piece lacking in how big a threat the Talokan are to the people of Wakanda and the world at large. They start strong but end relatively weak in the third act. On top of that, the whole source of this conflict was incredibly stupid and a terrible bit of writing to force this antagonizing relationship when Shuri and Namor are essentially the same people on different sides. Yes, I did love the performances. Denai Guerrera is so damn good in the warrior role. Angela Bassett soaks up every second of screen time, and the film is never better than when she's on screen. Lupita Nyong'o, in a much better type of Marvel role, pulls out so much empathy and understanding with her portrayal. Tenoch Huerta was outstanding too, and will go down as one of the best Marvel villains, even though he's not exactly written as one. Letitia Wright is fine, but her emotional acting felt contrived and weakened the moment in a few instances. Despite my criticisms, this is one of the best Marvel films, but still a middling film in almost every other regard. The first Marvel film I saw in theaters in almost 2 years, and I'm ready to go back into MCU hibernation. The next review is from Mick Cheaterson. Their favorite films are The Incredibles, Whiplash, Interstellar, and Upstream Color. Mick Cheaterson gave Wakanda Forever a 6 out of 10 as well. The review says, in part, "For me, this is a lot better than it is enjoyable. And achieving the maturity that it strives for, well, as mature as you can get for a movie with blue people and whales, it loses the fun side that the rest of the MCU displays as its true strength. I know that for most people, this is a welcome change. It certainly pairs well with how this plays out as a tribute to Chadwick Boseman. But for me, fun is the staple of the MCU, and it loses me when it downplays its core strength. I had a similar issue with No Way Home, actually, where it lacked the fun and energy that both the previous Spider-Man's installments had. And I'll say again, clearly this is on purpose, and within the respective stories, it makes sense of a more serious entry. In saying that, I had a great time and was entertained, lol. I guess my point is that I can't ever see myself wanting to rewatch this. As flawed as the original it is, it still has some top tier segments, and there's a flavor that exists there that entices myself for a rewatch. None such flavor exists here. Most of the movie is kind of bland, which is shocking with how unique the water people / world are. The plotting is fine, and I particularly love the villain. His fight scenes can be horrid with how poor the CGI is. I love his powers, I love his specific weaknesses, I love his introduction, and he's just fascinating to watch. I don't know, he's different enough to other previous villains in the MCU, and I appreciate that. The way Chadwick Boseman is handled is superb. The post-credit scene is great, and I can't believe no one saw it coming. The hypnosis song is really eerie and cool, and any action scene where the blue guys dominate and display their power is top tier. The slow-mo action reveals are terrific. The water bomb on the bridge is incredible. And I really like the dynamic towards the middle of the movie, with the prisoner and the bargaining that's going on for both sides. Oh, and I love the 3 types of handling grief that this movie depicts. It's a cool little commentary. Love what they did with Martin Freeman too. He has a nice little place within the narrative. Time for the negatives. Other than the brutal blue guy action, every other action scene was surprisingly poor. The original Black Panther had a few top tier fights, despite that awful final battle, whereas this film has nothing worthwhile. The final battle is real average, and the city street chase is just worse version of the corresponding chase from the first movie. I was very disappointed in the score too. The only good pieces were the ones from the original, and none of the modern songs in the soundtrack were good either, unlike in the original. The underwater world is probably the worst I've seen depicted. Phantom Menace, Aquaman, heck, even Goblet of Fire all have better depictions. And finally, I hate how everyone has Iron Man suits now. Also, in general, this kid, Riri Williams, just sucked. Her character was either annoying or could have been utilized better. Plus, they make out like it's all her fault when it literally isn't at all. Yeah, I don't know. The film didn't actually need her as a character. She could have been a lot more background and as a plot device, because there's no advantage in half-baking her like they did here. In the end, I liked it. I got my entertainment out of it, but I think that drastically reduced on a rewatch, and I mean drastically. I cried in the opening 5 minutes, but then the ending didn't get me at all. which kind of was a little disappointing as I was expecting the ending to hit harder than the opening, but apparently not. Still, the movie gets points for making me cry, regardless. And for another damning review, this time from Marcy, username Mirthox. Their favorite movies are Mishima, Stalker, Taxi Driver, and Perfect Blue. I'll note that at least two of these movies have a similar tone, which you might describe as dark. Marcy writes, this might be one of the most embarrassing films I've been to. At least a grand total of 7 other people were in the theater. One of the stupidest, schlockiest movies, even compared to Marvel standards. The movie tries its best to be serious, but fails on every level because none of the writing or acting is believable or interesting, and the characters are laughably simple and awful. The soundtrack is bad, the movie looks generic and lame, the CG is rushed and looks like a video game, and the character design is effing hilarious. Especially Namor, but to be honest, there wasn't much they could do to save that design. It was at least funny bad and not boring bad, mostly. Watch if you like Steven Seagal's movies and or Roland Emmerich. The most offensive part is that it tries to convince you it's a real movie. Next up, we have a review from Maddie_ASF. This user appears to be very new to Letterboxd. Their favorite films so far are Avengers Age of Ultron, the Disney Plus series, WandaVision, and Tangled. They scored Wakanda Forever a perfect 10 out of 10. This movie made me physically sob. Not only is the story touching and in beautiful moments, Chadwick Boseman, it also is visually stunning and I didn't feel bored. At any point during this movie, I was either crying, interested, or mentally cheering them on during battle. And being honest, while watching some of the Phase 4 movies, I felt kind of bored. I felt like the jokes they were making were being forced down my throat. That is not the case in this movie, however, as the jokes were perfectly timed and how they should be in a Marvel movie. The soundtrack as well was stunning and gave me chills every time, as all songs fit wonderfully into the story. However, Lift Me Up by Rihanna should have been played during the funeral, either one, but the tone of the end allowed this song to blend beautifully while transitioning into the credits. Our next review is by Emma, username Emma_85. Their favorite movies are The 400 Blows, Antoine, and Colette, Stolen Kisses, and Love on the Run. None of which I've seen and only one I've heard of, reminding me yet again that there are too many movies to watch in a single lifetime. Emma scored Wakanda Forever a 6 out of 10, and in the review they say, felt like there were 3 different movies stitched awkwardly together. The fun moments were great, the somber ones effective, but the action scenes were not riveting or emotionally impactful. The unexpected cameo was probably the best scene in the whole movie. I still feel underwhelmed by the underwater city. The choice for realistic darkness removed the possibility of being wowed. Loved the design of Namor, and Huerta was probably my favorite performance in the film. If I boil it all down, though, the movie felt small. Not the stakes, which I guess were total world war and genocidal, but the environs and the sets. There's like a single street of Wakanda that gets attacked, and the fight on the ship was like something out of a Disney park stage show. It was so confined. The next review comes from another Emma, username eSloan56. They score Wakanda Forever a 1 out of 10. Emma's favorite movies are Cam, The Babysitter, The Last Matinee, and Mandy. And I can personally vouch for The Babysitter and Mandy. It breaks my heart to have disliked this movie so much. The black women who starred in it are amazing and deserve recognition for the work they did. I think it's a huge win that the most prominent black superhero in cinema is a teenage female scientist. I was, am, and always will be Team Shuri for Black Panther, and I think not recasting T'Challa was a solid, bold choice. I have very deep concerns, however, with the way indigeneity is portrayed. There was a very striking line in a movie I watched recently about a house built on, quote, an Indian burial ground. That said, quote, their tortured souls are still down there in hell, waiting to reclaim their land. And that really sums up all that indigenous people are to Hollywood, and that's all they are in Wakanda Forever. Villains from the past who threaten the present. They are unrecognizable as human, with blue skin and gills, living under the sea to escape genocide, with a leader who declares his intention to wage war on the surface. The articles I found on this call Namor an anti-hero, but that is overly generous. It's pretty clear that he's the villain of the film. When he introduces himself, he says, "My people call me Kukulkan, Khan, but my enemies call me Namor." And then throughout the movie, he is almost exclusively called Namor. His plan to protect his people involves killing an innocent young woman just because she happened to invent a certain technology, and there's ample footage of him and his people raining destruction on innocent civilians in Wakanda. While the two nations become allies in the end, it feels forced, and an end credit scene implies that it was a strategic choice on Namor's part rather than genuine wish for friendship. His ultimate goal is still to wage war on the surface worlds. In particular, this conflation of indigenous futurity with destruction is very dangerous. Too many people living in a settler colonial states respond to land back movements with fear, and portrayals like this only feed into that fear, and that fear informs prejudice and violence. I want to be clear that I am in no way criticizing the indigenous Latin artists and scholars who choose to take part in the creation of this movie. I respect what Tenoch Huerta and others were hoping to accomplish for themselves and for their communities. I was impressed with Huerta's performance, perhaps the most redeeming element of this movie, that really does lend depth to Kukulkan's character and prove that he is definitely not sin amor. I don't want to have to die on this hill, and I would love to hear others' interpretations, but I look at some of the thoughtful and nuanced portrayals of indigenous people I've seen over the last few years, including Jairo Bustamente's revenge story, La Llorona, and this just feels like a million steps back. Our next review is from Ewan Matthews. His profile reads, "Besides video games, movies are my other passion." His favorite movies are La La Land, Jojo Rabbit, Star Wars, and Baby Driver. In their 4 of 10 review for Wakanda Forever, Ewan Matthews writes, "I was part of the crowd of people that thought the first Black Panther wasn't all that special. To me, it was just another Marvel film, which came out as the series had serious fatigue. I knew Wakanda Forever wasn't going to be amazing, but I never expected it to be as bad as it was going to be. When I first saw the trailer to the film, I thought it looked really good, and it got my hopes up for an improvement over their first film. The film does start off with a very touching tribute to Chadwick Boseman, which I really liked. If you're going to see this film, I hope you've been eating your carrots. Most of the scenes in this film have such poor lighting and contrast, it's very hard to tell what's going on, as well as see each character's face. Often in each scene, the characters are in front of a source of light, mostly windows, which then darkens, and the character you can barely make anything out. The colors are so desaturated as well that nothing pops. The story is just dull and boring. Nothing really exciting or original happens. Have you seen Aquaman and Avatar? Pretty much that. The runtime is 2 hours and 41 minutes, and you could watch the first 2 hours of this film without knowing you were watching a Marvel movie. It was more like Aquaman than it was Black Panther. The last half hour is where all the action happens, and it's good, but Marvel are leaning too heavily on everyone's favorite Avenger Iron Man by making several Iron Man characters and suits. It's really cool to see a female Iron Man, but Ironheart is more like a character from a Japanese anime than Iron Man. Plus, where did Riri get all of her equipment and money? People can barely own a small apartment, and she has a massive warehouse filled with Tony Stark level equipment, as well as being armed with the knowledge of someone 3 times her age. I know Marvel movies are not the most realistic in the world, but come on, you need to pick what's believable and what isn't. And now for a brief review on Letterboxd, which are often the best, by Patrick, username PatrickDev. Their favorite movies are Oldboy, Inglourious Bastards, Spider-Man 2 by Sam Raimi, and Good Time. Patrick gave Wakanda Forever 2 stars, and the review reads, "In full, not really bad, bit boring though." Our final review is from Alexia Eiko. Their favorite films are In the Heights, Pride and Prejudice, the 2005 version by Joe Wright starring Keira Knightley, The Book of Life, and Chocolat. Alexia Eiko gave Wakanda Forever a perfect score, and they said, "People will never understand how happy this made me as a Latina. Besides the amazing world building with Telocan, inspired by indigenous cultures throughout Mesoamerica, the acting, story, and overall raw emotion this movie portrays makes it stand out so high above so many movies, period. not even just Marvel movies. Talk to a wall, this movie is amazing. That'll be it for our reviews today. Thank you for listening to the first episode of Audience Thoughts, and tune in next time.